Hey guys, today we are in the book of Genesis 12. Now, before we jump into 12, I had lots of questions and I should have explained on chapter 11. Chapter 11 comes chronologically kind of in the middle of chapter 10. So when you read chapter 10, it says they had all these people and they spread to the face of the earth. Then you read chapter 11 and it says, no, everybody's in Babylon, right? And so what happens is everybody comes off the boat, they start to populate, they congregate in Babel and Babylon. They build the tower. Then, when God disperses them, then the rest of that genealogy of 10 goes on. All those countries that I said some people went to West Europe or Russia or to Asia, China, India, Africa. 11 kind of comes in the middle of chapter 10. And then we pick right up today with chapter 12. We finished on chapter 11 seeing that Abram left the Ur of Chaldeans and went to go into the land, but they came to Haran. Now, Haran, you gotta remember, he's there with his father and with his nephew Lot and with their families. And so it's not what God told him to do, but he is still following under his father's kind of path. Now his father has died. And now we pick up today in chapter 12 with him fulfilling what God had called him to do from the beginning. Now the Lord said to Abram, go into your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land I will show you. This is the land of Canaan. This is the promised land. So not just what we consider Israel today, but we will see it goes all the way up to modern day Lebanon, almost all the way down to Egypt, from the Mediterranean Sea to the Euphrates River. So it's about 300,000 square miles that God has promised them. Now, Israel will never take that much land, but that's what God promised to them. But notice in verses 1 and 2 and 3, chapter 11 was all about what man wanted to do. Now we see in chapter 12 what God wants to do. Notice these words: I will show you, I will make you a great nation, I will bless you, I will make your name great, I will bless you, I will curse those who dishonor you, and I will bless the ones who bless you. So we can see here 11 was all about what man wanted to do, 12 is about all what God is going to do. He does the work. And just a couple things. He's going to Canaan. He's going to make them a great nation, which means Abram is going to have many kids, many descendants. Now, this is an interesting thing because Abram is 75 years old and has no kids. And his wife is about 60. And at this point, they believe that she is barren. So this is a weird promise that he is given to a 75-year-old man with no kids. He says that he's going to make his name great. Today, Abram or Abraham is probably the most important person in Muslim faith, in Judaism faith, and in Christian faith. And so God kept his promise in that sense. He says, I will curse you, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. And so we can go on to verse 4. It says, so Abram, as the Lord had told him, and Lot with him. This is not a good thing. Remember what God said. God said to go out from your country and your kindred and your father's house. God wanted Abraham to go with just him and his wife. But Abraham, just like he did from Ur to Haran, he was faithful, but not all the way faithful. He didn't listen to God's complete word. And so he took his nephew Lot with him. When they came to pass in the land of Canaan, Abram passed through the land to the place of Shechem. Now, Canaan is not just this deserted land. It was filled with Canaanites and Amorites and Perizzites and Hittites, all these civilizations, these fortified cities, these people groups who have gathered together and created armies and militias. And so he's not just walking through a place that has never been explored. It's been explored and is already being populated and urbanized, right? So here comes Abram, this one guy coming in, not really belonging to any of these civilizations and just coming through. But notice this as he comes to a place of Shechem. This is important. We will see as we read, especially the book of Genesis, but we will see over and over again through the Old Testament and in the New Testament, this place called Shechem. The word Shechem simply means a shoulder. So it's kind of in the middle of two mountains or two big hills. So two shoulders. So it's the place there that he comes. What's interesting about the place of Shechem is in the New Testament, it goes by the name of Sychar, Sychar, Sychar. And this is the place in which John chapter 4, Jesus meets the Samaritan woman at the well of Sychar, the well of Abram, the well of Shechem, right? So just an interesting full circle of the Bible. And so they come and they do this. And notice verse 7, the Lord appeared to Abram and said, to your offsprings, there's that word again, I will give this land. Once again, it's a promise. God is meeting Abram and reminding him of the promise he made. But what's interesting is Abraham will never own any of this land. He will own a very small place of this land. And we will see later on, and we read in a couple weeks, he will buy a piece of property so that he and his wife can be buried in. And that is literally the only place of all of this promised land that Abraham will own. But all the descendants of Abraham will come to know this place. Verse 8, it says he goes from east of Bethel, and he pitched his tent with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. And so notice he made a tent. Abram never built a house. He never had. He was a Bedouin. He moved around and constantly through the promised land. He never owned a place. But notice he built an altar. An altar is known as a meeting place for God. It was a place that he could meet to God. He could worship to God. He could sacrifice for his sins with God. This was important. And we'll see over and over again, everywhere that Abram goes, he builds an altar. Verse 10, there was a famine in the land, so Abram went down to Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was severe in the land. Now, when we read this, we think, well, that's good, right? There was a famine, he went down to Egypt. Did God call him to Egypt? No, absolutely not. God called him to the land of Canaan, to the promised land. And so this shows us, once again, a faith of Abram, but not a full faith. He trusted God enough to go there, but he did not trust God enough to sustain him there. And I think that's a lot of times for us, we kind of fall in that same sin. We trust God a little bit, but we won't trust him with everything. And so Abram does what he thinks is smart, not what God wants, and goes down to Egypt. And he's going into Egypt, and he looks over to his wife, Sarai, and he says, I know you are beautiful in appearance. Remember, Sarai is 60 years old. So if you're 60, you're still beautiful, baby. It's good, right? It just shows that beauty is not necessarily what America thinks it is. Beauty is a lot of things in a lot of civilizations. And so she's 60. He knows that she's beautiful. And he says, when you see them, tell them that you are my sister. Because if you say that you're my wife, they will kill me. They will take you, and then I will be dead, and you will become a temple prostitute or a wife of the Pharaoh, or one of the many wives of Pharaoh. And so what's interesting here is, we don't know this yet, but Sarah and Abram, they are brother and sister. We'll find out in chapter 20, they're actually half brother and half sister. And so it's not a full lie, but it's not the full truth, right? So here we can see Abram left God's promised land to do what he wanted. And now as he leaves God's promise, he starts to lie, starts to deceive, starts to be a trickster to keep his own flesh alive, right? And so I think that happens a lot with what we do. The farther we walk away from God, the farther we get into sin. And so exactly what happens, they walk in, and all the princes of Pharaoh's court sees that she's beautiful. And we see in verse 15, it says he goes into Pharaoh's house. Now, this is a serious issue. This is a very serious issue. So when it takes him into his house, it means that he marries her, that she's going to be one of his many women. Now, this is serious, not just because Abram could lose his wife, but this is serious because we have already seen that the promise of God to send a Messiah will come through Shem, will come through Abraham. So God would not want the womb of the woman who's going to have the descendants of the line of the Messiah to be defiled by a wicked Gentile Pharaoh, right? So here she goes into the house, but nothing happens because even though in sin all this is happening, God is still protecting. And it says, and for her sake, he dealt with Abraham, and he had sheep, oxen, males, and donkeys. So here, this happens. Pharaoh took a liking to Abraham, gave him tons of money and animals, and also let him stay alive. But the Lord afflicted Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarah. Now, this will be interesting because as we move through the Bible, Pharaoh after Pharaoh will start to be afflicted by plagues by God. This will become a normal thing as we read in the Old Testament, especially with the Egyptian pharaohs. So Pharaoh called to Abram and said, "What is this that you have done to me? You did not tell me that she was your wife." So somehow either God told Pharaoh in a vision, in a dream, or allowed him to know this, or Sarah told Pharaoh and he believed her. But notice what is happening here. The wicked Gentile Pharaoh king is calling out Abram, God's man, on his sins, right? So it's just interesting that we have Pharaoh rebuking Adam here because of his sins. And Pharaoh lets his wife go, lets Abram go, and they go off. She was not defiled. The line of the Messiah was kept clean, and all is well as they're leaving Egypt. So you might be wondering, where is Jesus here in chapter 12? Well, actually, he's in two places. Let's look at verse 3. In verse 3, it says, "I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you, I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." In you, all the families will be blessed. This is a prophecy in which Jesus fulfills. The seed of Abram will bless all the nations, all the world. And we see that coming true with the Messiah. Through the Messiah brings the blessing of all of the world. You can read Galatians chapter 3, verse 8, and it talks about this verse. But also, in verse 7, it says, "Then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, 'To your offspring I will give this land.'" To your offspring. It doesn't say offsprings. This is not a plural word. This is a singular word. It's talking about a one person and one person in particular, and that is the Messiah. That is Jesus Christ. We see Paul writing about this in Galatians chapter 3, verse 16. He even says it's written to your offspring, not your offsprings, showing us that Jesus Christ, through Jesus Christ, coming through the line of Abram, will bring blessings to the world. Hope that makes sense. We'll see you tomorrow in Genesis chapter 13. God bless.